How's it going, ladies and gentlemen? My name is Ruffle Rowlet, and welcome back to a brand new video, guys. Now, today I want to talk about something that was messaged about specifically by an individual by the name of Cody Howard, who was asking me, hey, so I saw this video saying that Pokemon on the Switch is going to be open world confirmed, and I was like, okay, you know, can you give me some more info about this? What are you specifically referring to? And he was like, okay, so it talked about essentially that, like, during the Game Informer interviews, which you guys maybe have not watched these two, there's two specific videos about Game Informer talking and going over to Game Freak and actually having, you know, an interview with Masuda and whatnot about Pokemon on the Switch and what they plan to do and how it's going to work and stuff. Now, there happens a lot of things in these videos. I'm going to go through as much as I can, and also, I watched this podcast by Game Informer and by the two of the people who were actually interviewing Game Freak and, you know, Masuda and whatnot. They're specifically here, they talk about how it was there, and I have a bunch of bullet points here for specific points in the podcast, and I'm gonna mention all the times in this podcast. If you want to go do this yourself and check through the points I'm talking about, you can watch the whole thing. It's only 7 minutes, so you can watch the whole thing, or you can just look at the points that I specifically put down here, which is 1 minute 30, 2 minutes, 2 minutes 30, 2:55, 3:50, 4:10, and 5:16. Those are the areas where I want to talk about those points to make in this podcast. I don't want to get to that. The other one is these two Game Informer videos, right? Because in these Game Informer videos, they specifically talk about, you know, Breath of the Wild, for example. They mention Breath of the Wild, and, like, would a world like Breath of the Wild that's open and gigantic and whatnot and beautiful, would that work for Pokemon? Would an open world, like, you know, scenario like, you know, Breath of the Wild, would that work for Pokemon? And the easy answer that they give is, yeah, it could work, but that's essentially not what they're working on. They don't say that directly, but you can see kind of the way they're talking about it within it. So I'm gonna, you know, turn up the volume here so you guys can actually hear what they say, just so you can see what it's all about. So there you go.
That insane level of player freedom and expression that game offers. Do you think a Pokemon game could ever offer that level of player expression?
So, specifically right here, you'll see that Masuda essentially says, I think anything's possible, right? They could make a game like that, but is that what they're working on right now? Not really, most likely. For us, it's always come back to what's the most fun way to experience that type of thing would be. So, would it be fun for the player to experience such a world? For example, an open world like Zelda, if you're able to explore that world and catch Pokemon in that space, would it work? You know, would that make sense? Would that be the best way to enjoy the experience, just as they say right there? Or would that be similar to how Pokemon Go is, where it merges with the real world? Now, a lot of fans, a lot of Pokemon hardcore fans who just play the main series games on, like, you know, just the games on consoles and not on the mobile Pokemon Go. A lot of hardcore fans hate Pokemon Go because it doesn't have a proper battling system. It doesn't have what Pokemon's about, which is trading, battling, and all that stuff. It lacks those things, or it lacked those things in the start of its, you know, when it first started existing. So that's why a lot of people have, like, a big issue with Pokemon Go specifically. So, if we look through what they say right here, they essentially say, like, you know, that was kind of the thing that they did. Well, Pokemon Go was this kind of, you know, experience of, like, an open world Pokemon game in a sense, and the interviewer asks, as you can hear right here.
Concept of a completely free-form Pokemon for you?
So he essentially just answers with, you know, if Pokemon Go, was that like the kind of free world, the open world kind of that you wanted to, you know, see? And he says that's one expression of it. That's definitely one way to do it. But also, he loves the type of games like Zelda that have really good, strong settings and gameplay that really match it. But here's the thing, right? Pokemon is not about it's about the setting, it's about the gameplay and stuff. Sure, but what's, like, been the highest focus, specifically with the latest Pokemon games we've seen, Sun and Moon and Ultra Sun and Moon, it's been the story. Why is this important? Well, because for anybody who doesn't know, also I'm going to stop touching my hair here. Either way, for anybody who doesn't know, Pokemon is finally reached the pinnacle of, like, you know, in their own terms, pinnacle of storytelling. They're finally able to do facial expressions on all the characters except the main character for some reason. They're able to do facial expressions. They're able to do more intricate animations, more realistic, more realistic characters that look more, you know, to the human scale and stuff, and not chibi and stuff like Omega Ruby Alpha Sapphire, which, by the way, I loved. But, like, they're finally able to achieve what they wanted to achieve for such a long time. They're able to tell stories through cutscenes, something that Pokemon has never really had. Cutscenes weren't really a thing in Pokemon until, you know, the 3DS era, and Sun and Moon took that to an extreme level, right? That's a really interesting kind of prospect you have to think about. They love telling stories. That's where their passion lies. They love coming up with these interesting, like, mythologies about Pokemon and basing them on the real world. That's where Pokemon shines. That's what we love as fans. Most of us, I mean, there are different sections of the Pokemon community. There are people who love the stories. There are people who love the competitive aspect. There are people who just want to play the games and enjoy them in general terms. There are people who love the shiny hunting. There's so many different parts of this community that love different things, but Pokemon has always been, you know, this kind of this really interesting experience that bases itself on real world settings and stuff. So it makes sense that they want to focus on the story. But where does Breath of the Wild lack? Well, it does have good gameplay, really good gameplay. I played. I don't know where my Switch is right now, but Breath of the Wild, really good gameplay. Awesome open world. The world looks fantastic. In terms of, like, graphics, if they were able to achieve the graphics of Breath of the Wild, I think most people would be happy, but the open world aspect will not happen, and you'll see why, because they mention it in specifically this video, why that wouldn't happen. And there's a reason people are assuming it's going to be open world, and that's because in this video right here, where they asked them about the Switch, at the end here, you can see them, like, basically, like, you know, answering forum posts and saying, we're making it, and there's a specific post made by, an individual called Tebet, right here, as you can see, right there is, I'm just gonna move my camera so you guys can see what it says. It says right here, all I ask is that they make a basic Pokemon game, premise of gotta catch 'em all, in a large, open-ish world, bam, done. And they say, right afterwards, they essentially just say, we're making it. See, we're making it. Here's the thing. People assumed just because they said there, we're making it, that was going to be a confirmation of open world. No, it isn't. They're just simply just like, you know, it's not like who knows even if they knew what they were reading there. It could be they just like got a bit of a brief kind of, you know, overview of what it said, and they were like, oh yeah, we're making this. We're sort of, not exactly. But my point is, here they say, we're making it in terms of openish world and answering that stuff. But when you actually listen to them talk about, like, a game that is open world, aka Breath of the Wild, they have a different opinion on it. And that's because Breath of the Wild, if you think about it, suffered in the story department. It's hard to tell a story in a game when it's open world and the player can go wherever they want and they don't need to follow a path so they can be, you know, the story can be told. Would Pokemon work in a setting like this? Of course it could. You just gotta execute it right. But would it work for what they're envisioning right now? No. Does that mean we're not going to get an open-ish world of Pokemon? I mean, no, it doesn't guarantee anything. We don't know anything. We're just taking little nitty-bitty type of things and trying to, like, you know, understand things based on that. So, if you continue right here, they essentially say, if we could find a way to make that kind of setting work with that gameplay, we would, you know, we wouldn't mind doing it. You know, we would do it. But giving players a fun reason to go out and capture Pokemon, then there's, you know, always a possibility they could do this. But there is a big but here. See, he says that, but then he says, well, that's something that maybe the fans want, but, and here it comes, but from my perspective, the Zelda type of game is more suited to having a sword and going out and fighting enemies. That's the but. Everything that comes after but is, you know, everything that came before but is always just like, you know, not important. And he just says here, I'm not sure it's suited for going out and catching Pokemon. I think it is. I mean, I personally as a fan think that the open world setting would work for Pokemon. It would be perfect, but he doesn't agree with this. Now, the individual who wanted me to talk about this, Cody, mentioned specifically a few things here as to why he thinks that an open world wouldn't make sense, and I agree with exactly what he says here. So I'm going to read what he exactly said here and continue with this right here. So he says, so why would Nintendo let, and also you got to keep in mind, in this specific, like, right here, their Game Freak, you know, little video that where they talk about being a Game Freak in the offices and stuff. I think it's a longer video. You can look at, like, there's a bunch of them you can watch, but, like, this one specifically, right? They mentioned something very interesting, and that is that the Game Freak doesn't always listen to directions from specifically Nintendo. They don't always listen to what they say, but I still gotta read what Cody said here. So he says, so why would Nintendo let one of their biggest sellers become a game that all you have to do is go get DLC for maps for like $30 when they can continuously make the game for double the price, hence why they would never leave the game open world? This is something I agree with. Why would you make a game that's open world where you can spend literally an eternity going around doing things, trying to explore every little aspect of the world, like every little nook and cranny you'd try to like explore and see what's there, any secrets and stuff. You'd be going through every single thing, and you would have so much time on your hands. Why would they do something like that and then just release a $30 DLC for it or whatever with new maps, new things, new Pokemon, whatever? Why do that when you can just make a streamlined game that like is easier to make than an open world game that's gonna definitely be successful no matter what and follow the same formula like all the previous, 7 generations of Pokemon, and not really be taking any huge risks that would risk them, losing players and that sort of stuff. Why would they take such a huge leap and risk, and do something so, unrealistically, for them, like, unrealistically, worthwhile? Like, why would they do that? Why would they waste their time doing something like that when they already have a working formula that's always going to sell? I mean, look at Ultra Sun and Moon, right? Those games still sold like 8 million copies. They sold like 2.2 million copies in Japan. And they were the best-selling best-selling games in Japan of like that year. So still, Pokemon still sells like butter, and that's the thing, right? It's pretty insane. Now he continues here and says, "Would never leave the game open world." I mean, honestly, their whole style is, in quotation marks, "Hey, we make the game enclosed, so you follow our direction." Without that style of the game, we would never end, like, the game would actually never end, because you would be busy trying to climb Mount whatever to catch Ho-Oh, Lugia, I don't know, Entei. Doesn't really matter which Pokemon it is. My point is, like, what he's trying to get across here is that if they were to make an open world Pokemon game, you'd be too busy to care about, like, as much about the, upcoming releases, because you still have the previous game to experience, and you still haven't even finished that. So what's the point of buying another one instantly on release day when you still have the previous game with a lot of things to offer, right? I mean, that's the same thing when you look at games that, like, they release one game and then they live off of DLC or skins and that sort of stuff. I mean, look at games like PUBG, right? PUBG's out now, and this is a very bad example, but PUBG's out. PUBG's a game that's out, and here's the thing, they're never gonna most likely release PUBG 2, because that's never gonna happen. The game is kind of this experience that is what it is, and they make more money off of more sales. Or even Fortnite. Look at Fortnite. Fortnite is what Fortnite is. They're gonna keep updating it and changing it, but, like, they're never gonna re-release it, right? But Pokemon is different. Pokemon has always been this streamlined journey where everybody kind of experiences the same thing, but with different teams of Pokemon and stuff. Now, does this mean that Pokemon wouldn't be somewhat open-ish world, like, with more, like, freedom for the player? No, I definitely think that's possible, especially with the kind of the new console of the Switch, being able to handle larger sizes of, files and video games and that sort of stuff. They're able to handle more, so I'm guaranteeing you that they're most likely going to have the world slightly more open and free to explore. You wouldn't be locked into a specific area, and that's all you can do. You would be able to move around a bit, like, in your own pace, but you'd still follow a streamlined journey, because that's how Pokemon works. But here's another thing I want to mention, guys. I know I've been talking about this specifically for a long time now, but I want to bring up another thing, and that is, specifically in this interview right here, right, in this one, you will hear, actually, no, this one, you will hear Masuda keep mentioning, he'll keep mentioning, hey, buy a Nintendo Switch. Go out and buy a Nintendo Switch. Why does he do this? Well, because Pokemon going from, like, the 3DS, which they have a huge install base on, right, to the Nintendo Switch, where they can't estimate the sales. They can't estimate the amount of people who'd be willing to, buy the game, or how many people are going to buy the game. They can't estimate it because they don't know the install base. For 3DS, they knew the install base. They knew a lot of people had the 3DS, and they kept re-releasing, more 3DS, versions like the 2DS, the 2DS XL, 3DS XL, the new 3DS, etc., etc., etc. They kept re-releasing those, and Pokemon games were always, like, some of the best sellers on that, on those, on the consoles, on the 3DS. But now they're working with the Switch. They have never been on the Switch before. It came out last year. The Switch is a year and a few months old. Like, it's a brand new console. They're worried. They're very worried. And this makes me believe that Pokemon Red and Blue remakes are very likely, and that's something you can listen to specifically in this podcast here. And please go watch this podcast. It's very, very informative. These individuals were talking to actual Game Freak developers with Masuda and whatnot. They were talking to them, and they gave them actual answers. And this podcast mentions a few things that I think are interesting. Now, I'm not sure which part they actually exactly mention it at, but they do mention specifically that they asked them, hey, why was Kanto so many times mentioned in Sun and Moon? And, like, they were asking them that, and they were like, oh, because it was a celebration of the Pokemon Company of 20 years and whatnot, and we wanted to include a bunch of Pokemon from Kanto, and, Pokemon Go came out, so we wanted to celebrate and whatnot. And then they're like, okay, but is this a sign for things to come? And Masuda laughs and says, I can't tell you, I don't know. And then another developer also kind of, like, looks really with sketchy eyes at them. Now, this is simply just, like, being rumorish and, just messing around. But again, it's still something to, consider. So I'm gonna try to find that specifically for us here.
Best, hey, it's their game.
And he mentions right here, specifically they talk about, like, this open world and how they say that with Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild, like, specifically what I mentioned from this interview, how like it wouldn't be suited for Pokemon. The open world from Breath of the Wild wouldn't be suited for Pokemon. And within this podcast, they talk about that as well.
We're gonna, theorize 2019 at the earliest for Pokemon on the Switch.
Well, yeah, Nintendo already walked back the.
This is another thing, right? They talk about like the release date. Now, here's the thing: we know for a fact that things are looking in a sense of right now where it's either like 2018 or early 2019 for the release date. But I think it's going to be 2018, and the reason why here's why the biggest reason I think so, and that's because the thing I mentioned about the Nintendo Switch. The Pokemon company, Game Freak specifically, they know one thing for a fact, and that is that they don't know how many people are Pokemon fans that own the Nintendo Switch. So they know that if they want to make this game for the Nintendo Switch and they want it to sell, it has to be something that they can sell to the majority of the public. Now, what's the biggest generation of Pokemon that like most people know about? Well, that would be Kanto. How do you sell things to people with like, with old things? Well, you go with nostalgia. You use nostalgia to your advantage. That's what I'm assuming they're going to do here. I'm assuming they're going to use nostalgia, make a reboot or something off of Kanto, maybe even like, make Kanto but add something extra to it so it can be considered Generation 8. That's something they mentioned specifically within this podcast as well, that like when they asked them about it, they were just really like dismissive almost of it, and they were just kind of looking really sketchy. That's the thing that would work though, right? Because again, Game Freak doesn't know the install base of, of the Nintendo Switch. They don't know how many people have it, or how many people who do have it, that already own it, are Pokemon fans and were willing to buy it. But they do know one thing for a fact. If a new Pokemon game comes out, they're going to be able to sell a bunch of Switches alongside Pokemon if they do some sort of bundle, at Christmas season. And this is something they also mentioned within this interview. If you actually look at it right around here, they do mention, I think maybe this Christmas, a lot of kids will be getting it, right? They'll be getting, this was like from last year, like, oh, people will be getting a Switch this Christmas. A lot of kids will be buying it. But guess what they'll be doing this year as well? Also buying Switches. People who haven't bought a Switch yet, who are waiting to see what's going to happen, are going to buy it. People who are waiting for a Pokemon game are going to buy it this Christmas. If we're going to wait for another year, it's too much time to wait for another year. And Pokemon and Game Freak, they want to make as much money possible and sell as many as possible to make sure that they can establish themselves within, like, as a franchise on the new console. They want to establish themselves. So how do you do that? Well, you put your game out during the best season possible during Christmas. And you know that if you go with nostalgia, aka red and blue, red and green, etc., you will sell to the older fans and also to newer fans who just want to experience Pokemon no matter what. And if this new game is just Kanto, they know that older, longtime fans are going to be pissed off because they don't want to see more and more Kanto, but they do also know that maybe, hey, if they do Kanto, they can include another region there or something extra. Again, that's whatever, but my point is, I don't think an open world Pokemon game is likely to happen. And if it does happen, well, hey, I guess I was wrong. But I think it's going to be more open than what we've experienced in the past. I think routes are going to be larger and there's going to be more things to explore, right? But like in terms of actual full-on open world like Breath of the Wild, don't expect that. In terms of graphics, we don't know. But honestly, I don't know what we're working with here, guys. I don't know what we're going to be seeing in the future. I do hope we get an awesome Pokemon game, and the Pokemon Switch game ends up being, like, this great experience. But for now, I don't think it's open world. I think it's open-ish, but, like, not full-on open. Just, like, kind of areas where you can explore whatever you want, and move around as you want. But, like, the general game itself is locked in a specific position, and that's where you need to, from point A to point B. That's how it works. But maybe you'll be able to deviate from point A to point B by going to point C directly, or etc. My point is, they're going to do this in the same way they've done all Pokemon games. It's going to follow the same formula. I know this video is very long. I'm sorry. I wanted to discuss this as much as possible. Let me know what you guys think about this in the comment section down below. And thank you, by the way, to Cody Howard. Cody Howard hit me up, and he was telling me, like, hey, I wanted to talk about this because I want to hear your opinion. And honestly, I am so excited to see what this game is going to be like. And I think it's a 2018 release still, based on the fact that, like, they need to establish themselves on the Nintendo Switch. They need to establish themselves, because keep in mind, this is one game. We still have loads of Pokemon games for the future that need to come out. So keep that in mind, guys. Either way, thank you so much for watching. My name is Ruffle Rallet. Have a great day, guys. I'll see you all the next time, and bye-bye.